Okay, yeah, it's enough power. I just had to wind it out. So, the McLaren GT. You'd think by the way McLaren has targeted and named this car that, hey, maybe it would compete with the likes of, oh, I don't know, a Continental GT or a 911 Turbo S. If my head was stuck in the numbers, maybe I would entertain that for a second. But if we look closely, it's still got a McLaren badge on the front. McLaren. Not only that, but the doors, hard to miss, but they still do this. Yeah, you guys, not your average GT. Let's go for a drive. So what does it compete with? If it's not the traditional GT cars that we think of when we want to go on a long road trip, but still have a growling V8 in the background when we want it, that's the key. We have to look at the rest of the McLaren lineup. Now, the 720S, of course, has been discontinued. Very comfortable car, and we'll get into the suspension changes here. And then you have, what? Yeah, the 765 LT, which I have not driven, but by all accounts is a track-focused, track-ready car. Same with the 600 LT. Now, this shares a lot of components with that Sports Series McLaren 600 LT. But just how different have they gone with the GT, and is it still a comfortable daily driver, or is it a comfortable GT car asterisk for a McLaren? We'll stop in a couple minutes and go over some of the design details, but of course, like I mentioned, still has the dihedral doors. I love these. They're easy enough to open. It's a bit of a different door handle than were on some of the previous older McLarens. And to get in it's not much easier than any modern McLaren that I've driven. They all, of course, still have the same carbon tub, but big differences come when we step on the inside and, of course, when we fire it up. 5. And of course, if you guys remember the McLaren 570 GT, which obviously was based off the 570, but had just a couple extra things that made it a little bit more practical. It had that kind of sideways opening rear hatch in the storage compartment. Of course, the trade-off with all these cars, including the GT I'm driving today, is you can't see the engine. But what happens when McLaren fully commits to the GT? It was very tough for the untrained eye to tell the difference between a standard 570S and a 570 GT. This is taking the Sports Series and turning it into the most comfortable daily drivable package that McLaren could possibly make right now. McLaren's a small manufacturer. They don't even build their engines in-house. Their engines are built elsewhere, and then they basically just bring everything in and assemble the cars, design the cars, and build the cars that way. And we saw how well that worked out for them with the Artura launch. But we don't need to get into that. First off, of course, we've got the standard active button down here. I'm gonna I'm gonna hit the ESC off button, which just means put it in dynamic, because earlier I was coming out of a corner and the traction control, my God, just cut in so rude. It was incredibly rude how it did it, but just really, really hard. I would think a McLaren would be a little bit more progressive in the way it kind of cut power, but it was not. It was violently just, it put a stop to the fun real quick. And right now I have the suspension in comfort, but we'll change that in a sec. .612 horsepower, 465 pound-feet of torque. So and a 7-speed dual clutch. I'll let this Cadillac behind me. That's what the V's were built for, were they not? So the 4-liter back here. So it's effectively a detuned version of what was found in the 720S, although it does have slightly smaller turbos. It's probably just, I would imagine, under a little bit less stress. But compared to the 600 LT, that car, by all accounts, is just a very kind of peaky, top-end car. This guy loves it. Oh, it's not even a V, it's a CT4 350T. It's a much more kind of top-end car, where this wants to give you a little bit more low-end torque. So power on from 4,000 RPM. Now, it's quick. Don't get me wrong, it is fast. I haven't driven a 720S in quite some time. I'm gonna be honest, 612 horsepower, not the most amount of power. And even with this opened up exhaust here, basically no rear muffler. The owner of this car, Shin, thank you Shin for letting me drive it, by the way, has just put in an X-pipe in the rear, and then I believe it just has the resonator. It still has the valve in the exhaust, but it's kind of funny because it makes no difference. Oh yeah. Wow, brake feel. Everything is so incredibly mechanical, and this is how the 720S is very similar. And there we go. Bite and go. Wow. Okay, yeah, it's enough power. I just had to wind it out. It's got torque, but you still just want to rev the snot out of it. 6,000 to about 8,500 RPM, red line. It just pulls and pulls and pulls. Little pop on the downshift there. Still gives you just, honestly, you guys, an indescribable shove of torque into my spine. It still gives me that. And it's different. It feels a little bit different here. I hate to say it, kind of looks like a Corvette. From some angles, it's a lot more subtle, and it could pass for something a lot closer to what you could compare it with, what I mentioned in the intro, a 911 Turbo S. This is one of my favorite features though. If you look above me, there's a glass roof. Now the 720S kind of had something a little bit similar. It was kind of relegated to the doors here, but this is controllable, and I can adjust exactly how much light it's letting in. The problem is, and this is, when you step into a McLaren, a British car, some of the stereotypes that British manufacturers had adopted and kind of grown into over the decades still hold true here. So the touch controls are not always responsive. Like I just hit it 4, 5, 6, 7 times and it hasn't done anything. So it's a little bit finicky in how it wants to respond, but we've got 5 levels here to control exactly how much light we're letting in here. These seats, a little bit more comfortable, but less supportive than the 720S seats. Now, again, it's been 4 years since I've driven a 720S, almost 4 years. I mean, I could be in here and be comfortable in most scenarios, I feel like. The one thing that's incredibly annoying, Aston Martin kind of did something similar to this in addressing seat controls by putting them on the center tunnel. Those cars have massive center tunnels, of course, because there's a transmission there. Here, there's no trans. So what they've done is just stuck the buttons on kind of the side front of the seat. It's braille. You have to feel around. It's kind of annoying. I'd imagine if you own the car for a few months, maybe you'd get used to it, but it is a little bit frustrating. You will notice, or at least I kind of did, even though I don't have a 720S side by side right now, the overhangs are longer. So when we look at the amount of car past the front axle, there's a little bit more at the front and then a little bit more at the rear. These wheels, in my opinion, give it away too. So many spokes here. It has more of a luxury GT vibe, almost something you would almost see on an S-Class, to be honest. This one's also been optioned with the carbon ceramic brakes. The front end here, this fin right here, this is what I'm talking about when it kind of looks like a C8 Corvette. Same with the headlight. And look at that, you could fit a toaster under here. There's so much room between the front lip and the ground, and this is with nose lift not activated. Wow, just gorgeous views out here. You guys might also notice that fixed wing in the back. This is not stock. Now, the owner of this car has made a point of adding a few carbon bits onto it. You can see the MSO style. It is not factory authentic MSO. It was made in Japan, carbon, but it is, as far as I can tell, a very high quality piece that's been fitted on here. He's also gone ahead and put a couple carbon covers on the intake vents. This, personally, my opinion, I would not do this. It kind of ruins the smooth lines that honestly are very similar to the 720S, but give a little bit more air. The black roof on this mirror white MSO color here, tons and tons of flake. My palms are sweaty. It's a sign of a good car, always a sign of a good car. Also really happy that McLaren's gone with a leather steering wheel and not an Alcantara steering wheel. Because of course, the more miles you put on the car and the more you touch the steering wheel, the worse they get. And it's a GT car. You're going to put miles on it, hopefully. So that makes sense. I mean, it is so comfortable when you're in the comfort setting. Even sports settings, not quite too stiff for the street. Track is, I would say so. I would not use track setting on the street, but that's, I mean, a track setting you shouldn't be using on the street really anyways, especially when it comes to suspension. But the 720S had insane suspension engineering going on. Not only did it have adaptive dampers, this has the same adaptive dampers, just tuned a little bit softer. The 720S had some crazy trickery going on. I'm not going to attempt to try to explain it to you, but basically the hydraulic fluid was cross-integrated between the right and left sides of the vehicle. Here, that's not the case. That's gone, so it's a little bit more simplified in that sense, and that's enabled McLaren to keep the costs down here. So I love this. There's a couple things that make a McLaren still a McLaren, and some of these things I just hope will not go away anytime soon. Hydraulic steering, okay, that's one. The steering wheel is number two. It's so simple. There are 0 buttons other than the horn on the steering wheel, and then of course your paddle shifters. That is it. And that's what can separate it from a lot of the other GT car competition. Now, it is almost as quick as the Turbo S in a quarter mile. The GT will do 0 to 60 in 3 seconds flat, or 2.8 with a rollout. Wow, rear end just hooks up, even in the damp there. And quarter miles dealt with in 10.7 at 133 miles an hour. Now, the reason why I'm trying not to sound so jaded in this video, I just got back from Vegas at Iros Motorsport, and I was driving their 750 HS RS3 kit. And I ran on the street just casually a 10.5 at 137, which is faster than this. Of course, all-wheel drive helps, but even still. Now, after driving this car in a couple of different environments, nothing too crazy, a little bit in the city, out here on the open road, what the GT sets out to do, and I think it does it quite well, is to minimize the McLaren-ness of the car, the undrivability of some of the other more intense LT McLarens, so that you can take the rest of the world in as much as possible. And of course, part of that equation includes road trips. Now, in the front of the car, there's no more space than there was in the 720S, as demonstrated right here. It's not until you get to the back hatch where the real space opens up. You have quite a bit more room and a few straps down there to really buckle yourself down. Supercars have come so far in the last 20 years. Looking back in 10 years, I mean, McLaren's probably not gonna make another car like this that's fully gas powered, but aimed at the GT cars. This is an anomaly. I don't think this is gonna go down as one of the greatest McLarens of all time, absolutely not. But as far as a well-rounded car, awesome daily, great package, and amazing engine. This is for the ones who don't wanna mess with a V6 McLaren. That's just the reality of the situation. A lot of folks don't want that hybridization of their supercar. They still want a twin turbo V8. Who wouldn't? I do. I don't know about you guys, but that pretty much sums up the McLaren GT. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you haven't already, subscribe and hit me up on Instagram at Roads Untraveled. You can see what I'm driving on a day-to-day basis. We've got a few things coming up I'm sure you guys will love. We'll see you next time.